no longer silent, patient access stories. My doctor told me that I qualified to participate in a clinical trial. I really came unglued because he didn't know how women that looked like me were responding to this trial. Today is a special day because we are having a podcast takeover with Linda Murakami from Amgen, Head of Health Equity, Patient Engagement, and Policy Advocate Relations. Linda's also a breast cancer survivor. All right, Linda.
I think this is going to be one of those chats that harken back to our first meeting. I want to say 5 years ago in December. When I first met you, it was in Sacramento, and you had me driving around, going to meet you at some restaurant that looked like it was a warehouse. And I had done my research. I said, I know who Reverend Tammie is. I know a bit of her story. But when we sat down, I said, can you just ground me? I want to hear from you. Like, talk to me about how Carrie's Touch was started and what your hopes were for the women that you serve. Can you just give me that little slice one more time?
Wow, that's a big question. 5 years ago, we've had a whole pandemic since then, and life looks drastically different today than it did 5 years ago. I'm 5 years older, so I don't even remember the warehouse, let alone what I said to you. But because I eat, drink, sleep, and just revel in this work, what I can tell you is that, almost 20 years ago when I was first diagnosed, that there was not a lot of support for women that look like me. And when I learned the statistic that Black women were dying at 41% higher rates from breast cancer than white women who were actually diagnosed more, I just was baffled. And to be candid about it, I was very angry. My doctor told me that I qualified to participate in a clinical trial, and he thought it would be great for me. I was 39 years old, so I was a young survivor. I had a lot of life left. I had young children still in the home, and here's this doctor telling me that there's a clinical trial and that Black women die at 41% higher rates, that I had a fast growing tumor that had already begun to spread, and that it was unlikely that I would live to see the coveted 5-year cancer anniversary. And I was thrust into this foreign experience where I didn't know the language. I definitely didn't know the players. And there was so much more that I didn't know about what was ahead of me. I asked the doctor, how were Black women responding to the trial that he was proposing I take part in as part of my treatment? And his answer was that he didn't know. He literally sat in my exam room and said, I don't know. And when I tell you, if I was already angry, I really came unglued because I said, everything that I just ran down to you, obviously he told me. So then to have the tables turn and me ask him the question about how Black women were responding to this treatment that he's proposing that I have, I felt like what so many other people have felt that I have experienced through the years. I felt like a Tuskegee experiment because he didn't know how I or women that look like me were responding to this trial. You're already telling me that I'm going to die, and then you don't know about the treatment? Make it make sense. And so I went on a quest to try to find out how I could live. I went to Dr. Google, and Dr. Google 20 years ago is not the Dr. Google of today. When I Googled Black women and breast cancer, I only found one study about Black women and breast cancer. And it was a study that was done in North Carolina by a doctor from another organization. wanting to know why Black women presented at later stages. And so his findings had the top 20 results. And in the top 5 results were lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding about the disease and treatment, and lack of seeing people that look like them, meaning seeing other Black women who actually survived this disease. And this is in the top 5 responses. And I'm like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that Black women, you're telling me that Black women are dying at approximately 41% higher rates than white women because they don't know and because they haven't seen other people that look like them? But I started asking the question back then, why are Black women dying? And what can we do about it? And more importantly, and more closely, how can I live? In that moment, I didn't have the Harriet Tubman complex. I wanted to know how Tammie Denyse could survive this disease and still be able to see my children graduate middle school and high school and college and build families. And those were experiences that I wanted to share with my children. And my doctors were telling me it was unlikely and that the treatments that they were offering me, they were unaware of how those treatments would help get me to those lived experiences with my children.
The key pieces of what you said when I first met you that still are true to this day, to this very moment, that inspire the work that you do, is that when you ask the question, how would the investigational asset work in somebody like you, they had no answer for you. But the one thing that I've heard you say, I mean, honestly, probably 100, maybe 1,000 times, that always gives me the chills. I said, sign me up, because by God, there is going to be one woman, one person they can point to after me. When a woman like me asks that question, they'll have that. And I'm like always struck by that, because the power of what you said and what you thought, like your motivation was you wanted to be there for your kids, you wanted to experience life and those milestones. But for you, it was almost more a driving factor that it was unacceptable. And so when you were faced with that, you said, that is unacceptable. Directly to your doctor, you were like, that is absolutely not an acceptable response. And what you did by participating in what is now an approved treatment, it is, you put the stake in the ground. You basically said, I am going to make sure that no woman beyond me has to hear the answer. I have no idea. I don't know. We don't have the data. So I'm always struck by that, Reverend Tammie.
So when I think about, being pissed off at my doctor asking me those questions and what made me decide to participate in the clinical trial, earlier I said I didn't have the Harriet Tubman syndrome in those initial moments and thoughts. But as I sat down with the researcher for 4 hours to go through the 32 pages of possible side effects to understand what that meant, and to understand that if I was going to sign up, what I was actually signing up for, I made the decision not just for myself and not just for the memories that I wanted to hold with my children, but I made the decision because I knew that there were countless women that I would never, in some form or fashion, ever meet, but who would need my voice to help them navigate their breast cancer journey. I was doing my clinical trial was testing the efficacy of what they deemed the red devil. That's how intense the drug actually is. I won't say was. And so they were testing whether or not it was more effective for the drug to be administered every 21 days or every 14 days. And I was randomized into the group that was every 14 days. And when I tell you I was sick for 13 of the 14 days, I was sick for 13 of the 14 days. And ultimately, today, standard of care for that treatment is every 21 days because they deemed that every 14 days was too hard and didn't give the body enough time to recover, to prepare for the next phase. And so I said, yeah, sign me up. Because if I die, they're going to have information on one Black woman. And at that time, I'll just be honest, I didn't understand that it takes a minimum of 2% of enrollees of any group for them to even do a separate study of the impact, of the women on or the people in the trial. So there's just a lot of layers into this. And when we talk about access and moving forward, you used a phrase that I try to stay in language for the people that I serve. As a clergy person, we are always taught to speak in a language that the people will understand. And so you use the term investigational asset. Nobody in the hood knows what investigational asset is, right? And so I don't use industry language intentionally, because if people are hearing this and if I am going to be their gatekeeper, they have to know what the heck I'm talking about. And more importantly, they have to trust that when I am in the room with people that are using those types of phrases, that I am able to effectively communicate some of the burdens and the barriers that they are experiencing, even if it takes me 10 times to make the people in the room understand what the people from the hood or on the streets are talking about. But yeah, and I told my doctor that it was unacceptable, absolutely that it was unacceptable, to even think that he could present me with that type of a treatment protocol without knowing how I was going to be affected. And so when we think about access and we think about the women that Carrie's Touch was founded, solely for, it has always been around awareness and education, probably at its core, because going back to that study that I found the information, it was around lack of awareness, lack of education, lack of understanding, about breast cancer, about screening and about treatment and so on and so forth. And when I started Carrie's Touch, I was completing my master's degree. And as a part of my, capstone, I had to do a community project. And here I am, yay, I'm navigating breast cancer. I'm figuring it out. And I'm going to save Black women. I put together a project and we said, I'm a preacher. I'm going to go into the churches and I'm going to raise awareness. If lack of awareness is the issue, then the solution has got to be to raise awareness. Well, what I found was when I went into the community and talked to the women is that Black women are dealing with so many other traumatic experiences that it is unnerving to me that a diagnosis as serious as breast cancer is second to them taking care of their families, to them making sure that they are taking care of sometimes their elderly parents, and sometimes it's other family members, children's, and a lot of the cultural dynamics that come into Black culture that women were dealing with, that they could not prioritize themselves or their health to even take breast cancer seriously. So what I found is, my hypothesis failed 100%, because what I found was that women needed so many other resources to just do what Maslow's hierarchy of needs talk about at the basic rung, which is safety and shelter and food. Women didn't have that. And, these are women from all walks of life that were struggling just to survive their daily lives. So I had to adjust my thinking and adjust my question for investigation around how to approach Black women and how to better serve Black women.
No, that is, I mean, I just feel like you hit on so many really important points, and just the journey of education and understanding. And what I love is that of all of our little chit chat back and forth so far, only once did you call me out on one phrase. So 5 years equals only one phrase that I threw out there, versus when we first were meeting and you would literally say to me, I had to set up a meeting with another friend to understand what you said in our meeting because I had no idea what you were saying. So it's progress.
No, but here's the thing. At least I still understood investigational asset. I understood the term. So you are still batting 1,000. You are still batting 1,000. So
I'm going to take that. I'm for sure. I'm going to take that.
Yes, ma'am.
So
yes,
the one thing that I feel like you have shown a light on, truly, when you speak and how you speak about it, the 41%. And when you dig deeper into the work that you do and the touch points you have with the women in the community, it's not just one thing, right? I mean, looking at why that number is what it is, like it goes so far back into the types of systems that are built, the institutional racism that is baked in.
I wanted to understand this process. I needed to know what this was going to look like. And while I didn't start out with a Harriet Tubman complex, it's 100% on board now. I am bringing other women along this journey because they told me I wouldn't see 5, and I'm approaching 20. So there were some things that I did, and let me not take all of the credit. My faith in God, I believe 100% that God healed my body, that God led me to the doctors that I had, that God provided me with the village that I had, because I did things in my journey that most patients don't know to do up front. Patients don't know. I took an army in the exam room with me after that doctor told me that he didn't know how I was going to, whether or not the treatment was going to work for me. I brought an army with me, an army of witnesses. I never went to the doctor without less than 5 people. And every person had a role in that doctor's office. There was either a note taker, there was a question asker, there was a prayer warrior in there. There was somebody to sit with me and hold my hand. And there was somebody just to be in the room to round out the folks that were there, in the event that somebody else dropped the ball at any given point. So, and I tell people, when you go into your doctor's office and you take people with you, if you have a crier, they can't go. They can meet you for coffee afterwards and cry, but you are literally building your army to save your life. Because unfortunately, too many Americans have to go into a doctor's office and become an advocate rather than just being able to be a patient. And in this post-COVID era, even though we're not post-COVID, but in this post-2020 COVID era, so many doctors are now asking patients, what would you like for me to do? I just recently I came through very 5 weeks of illness, cold, flu, sinus infection. And the doctors were asking me, can you prescribe me some cough medicine so that I can get rid of this cough? Can you prescribe, if I have some antibiotics to get rid of the sinus? And I am telling the doctors, and so that's a sad state of affairs. And especially when we're talking about step therapy, because the doctors, we don't know all of the steps. We don't know that D treatment is even available to us, because all we know is A or B. If we've talked to a well-informed friend, they might know about C. And so the doctors are now putting it back on us to go through the step therapy protocol. It's maddening, when we look at step therapy, when we look at these co-pays. Carrie's Touch many years ago was one of the first organizations in California that signed on to the oral chemotherapy parity bill. And, talking about, co-pays that were literally $3,000, $5,000 per dose.
I mean,
Who in my community or the community that you grew up in could afford $3,000 for the entire treatment course,
yeah.
let alone for a single dose?
100%, 100%. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. And I feel like you were working on things like this 6, 8, 9 years ago.
Oh, we were working on things like this 15 years ago. I am almost a 20-year survivor. I took care of myself. I put on my own oxygen mask first. I took care of myself. I healed. I did the things that I needed to do physically. Then I took care of my mental and my spiritual and emotional well-being. And then I put on, my boxing gloves and I said, let's go. So for almost 18 years, Carrie's Touch will be 18 in September. So for almost 18 years, we have been doing this fight. And I think the oral chemotherapy parity bill came out, I will say about 14 to 15 years ago. So we have been on this journey for a long time. They didn't have the language. They didn't use the words that we are using these days. It wasn't as prominent as it is today, which I think speaks to progress, if ever so slight, that at least there's acknowledgement that these things are happening, that patients don't have the access that they need, that there are barriers to care, that there is systemic racism, that patients of Black and patients of color deal with racism even going into the doctor's office. We deal with it on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I feel like as even small progress has been made, Reverend Tammie, what you and I both know is for that small progress, then you have insurance companies and the middlemen, the pharmacy benefit managers who are getting savvier. And so now it's copay accumulators, which again, Greek, like the first time I heard that phrase as a decades long policy person, I had to take a moment and I'm like, okay, what's this new magical thing that they have come up with to put yet another, how they make money, how patients are not going to be able to afford things, how, when you think you have built in access programs, like they're still going to take it back to the patient. And for all of the big, using air quotes, because, people can't hear the air quotes, but these are big time, giant air quotes and like purple or red, and they're like, neon. When there are fixes to help patients access their treatments at the highest level in Congress and beyond, what ends up happening is the patients actually never see that benefit. Like if you have a system, right, and it gets caught in the middle and you have the middleman who's going to take it, like you're still not getting it to the people who need it, who it's designed for at the end of the day. So I feel like the thing I would say, just foremost, without voices like you, without the programs that you put in place to say, hey, like silence is not an option, right? Using your voice, weighing in, like being, a part of saying like, this is not acceptable is the only way for people to know that people are watching, patients hear and care, loved ones of patients hear and care, right? I mean, it shouldn't be on a patient as they're going through their journey to have to be the ones to like, they're so sick and then they're doing this on top of it. It's like the voices have to come together in protection and support of the patient journey. Everybody has a patient in their family. Everybody, may themselves, unfortunately, experience a journey of their own. So I feel like this is that moment where the voices have to rise, have to be the ones to weigh in and do it. And programs like yours, the intimate conversations, like the campaigns like this, like the educational information you arm patients with, and you being a voice Because for those who can't, because they are experiencing the journey that they are, to be the person who can say it and kick the door down, and I mean, it's just incredibly important and invaluable. And I mean, for us, we at Amgen have always appreciated and continue to hold you up and appreciate the work that you do, because it is so important. I mean, personally, your place in my life, your friendship, like the work that you do, like I'm right here, elbow to elbow. We'll do the work. I will, not bungee jump with you, but I will jump off of the high dive, and we will get into this working and continue to. But I mean, just really kudos to you for all that you do and continue to do, because it's critical.
Well, thank you. I am not likely to ever bungee jump, so you don't have to worry about that. But I want to tap in just really quickly on a couple of things that you said. You talked about social determinants of health. And for a long time, once I found out what social determinants of health were and what it meant to the system, I got a different understanding and response to it. And so I won't say that social determinants of health are not important. I think understanding what social determinants of health are definitely important. But what I don't like about how racist and white supremacist systems navigate that space is that it makes the patients the victims for their circumstances. Instead of saying that here are circumstances that some humans have that might impact their health and well-being. And so let's come up with resources and programs that help them better navigate these circumstances, right? I know that there's a city here in city here in Northern California that someone has reached out to me because they are a church that has a large percent, I want to say 70% of their church members have cancer. And when they looked up, cancer diagnosis in that community, it is an astronomically high number for folks that have been diagnosed with cancer. So then they're looking at the environment and where the people live and all of those things. And so instead of saying that these are the social determinants of health, then too bad, too sad that your economic status or your financial status doesn't allow you to live somewhere else. And now you just become a statistic, and now we just research you. That's when social determinants of health become problematic for me. I think that social determinants of health are just another, racist construct to be able to make money for the people that make all the money anyway. And it doesn't oftentimes, not always, nothing's 100%. But oftentimes it does not provide the necessary resources for those who are being impacted the greatest by these social determinants. The other thing is when we look at neighborhoods that are not deemed wealthy, financially wealthy, I know growing up Black, and I know so many Black people, and I'm sure based on the community that you grew up in, like you didn't know that you weren't Mexican until you were 4. But somebody had to tell you that you weren't Mexican. And that's the same thing about growing up poor. We grew up poor, but we didn't know we were poor because wealth in our community looked differently. And I don't know if that story or that understanding was illuminated to me more than it was when I was in Africa and they were having these rolling blackouts. And I mean, it was black, just completely black. And those of us who weren't from Africa, who were not having electricity issues, we didn't understand it. And so I asked the question, how do people survive with these rolling blackouts? Because you don't know when they're coming and you don't know how long they'll last. And the response from my sponsor or guide was just so profound. He said, "We don't rely on electricity for survival. We are resourceful and we know how to navigate the space beyond electricity." And that just was so profound to me because that's what I think about growing up. That's what I think about, being told I was poor. I'm a dark-skinned Black woman. I was told I was ugly my whole life. I am often disregarded in public just based on the color of my skin. But my family told me I was beautiful. So I didn't understand it when people told me that I was ugly. I was like, well, define ugly. Oh, you defined beauty based on its proximity to whiteness. Right? So these are all the things that are happening in community that go back in alignment with our health, and why so often Black people are not privileged to prioritize their health. We want to pause for a moment to thank our platinum partner, Amgen. Amgen has been a consistent partner who not just talks the talk, they fight hard to illuminate voices and experiences of diverse patients. We're truly thankful for such a beautiful partnership. This conversation is also activated by Genentech and Change for Sean. Thank you to all of our partners.
You spoke a mouthful there. I mean, just so many things. And all of those things resonate so deeply with both me and because my family, right. My family is many of the things that you speak about. And just the notion of what beauty is and is not, and how, among communities, when I think about my husband and our family from the Deep South, and just kind of even what geography, right? And like within kind of the South, what's not the South versus the North, like his very tiny little rural kind of where he grew up and what, he experienced. He and I were having a conversation about the work that I do. And I said, "Hun, you actually told me," and I said, "I'm just checking this because granted, at my age, my memory is getting a little fuzzy." And I said, "But were you serious when you said when you were little, you were picking tobacco to make money because there was no money for any extras. Like there was barely money for like the basics, so that you could help the family food wise, but so you could have candy money." And he's like, "Oh yeah. I was 11. I was picking tobacco, and I could keep about like 1/3 of what I would earn." And he was like, he has vivid memories of, right, his aunties and his uncles also picking tobacco and then smoking it, and the loss of at least one uncle, if not more, to a type of lung cancer, and just for him, he was like, it wasn't something that he thought about, kind of that long stretch impact of community, of impact to community. You do what you have to do to survive, but how and why are you doing it? And then now, as an adult, as an almost 60-year-old, he says, there is nothing that you work on that does not run strong in my family. Cardiovascular disease, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, fill in the blank, prostate cancer, like, unfortunately. And what he'll also say is people in the community don't want to talk about it, right? I mean, they have other ways of talking about it, or just to brush it off. And it's more of somebody worked through it, didn't address it, right? And then they end up, in a dire situation because they didn't have time. And he's like, it is not an actual, somebody says, I don't have time for that. No, like actually they don't have time because they are the person in the family, right? Who everybody relies on, like, his mom, Mama Davis. Just like, when you're raising like 5-6 children and you're basically the anchor of it all, like there is no moment where, no, up at 4 a.m. because, your early job is to go work at a cafe making biscuits. And then your actual job is to go to the courthouse, right?
Yeah.
Because you're doing X. And then your fifth job is to come home because you have all the kids. And then you're going to the church, like all of those items that come along it makes me think very much about when you shared with me the work you do with UCLA and Project SOAR. Mm-hmm. And your description, you were like, I want to understand more, need to understand more about this strong Black woman. Yeah. Like, what does that role and what does that do? Like for you, you're looking at it, breast cancer, but fill in the blank. It can be anything, right? The disease is not the point. It is the role that the woman takes on top of everything else. That has that stress and that, right, how they make choices and then what that does and what that means as they experience any healthcare challenge and journey and experience. But it just, all of your work like strikes me as being so foundational and so impactful. But just like double clicking for a second on that work and kind of how you are envisioning that work and what it's shown you and like the next phases for it, because over even the span of time you've been doing that, everything you've learned, the fact that you've been published, the fact that you presented, the fact that there's more to be done in that space, like it is a marathon, not a sprint. Right. And where you are in this work and where you continue to go, I feel like the end, like, right, the finish line continues to move out further, but along the way, whatever those of us who can we be a water station for you? Can we give you some like energy gel? Like all of those pieces, because that work has now even changed, right? You now know so much more and where you need to take it and where you're driving. Like talk to us about that for just a sec.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to put you on my team to be a spokesperson to go out there and do some public speaking and marketing for team, Carrie's Touch team, Tammie Denyse. I'll take it. So just consider yourself signed up because you do outline, the work that we do so well. Project SOAR is near and dear to me. If I go back to when I talked about doing the research and going into the churches and my hypothesis failed, Project SOAR was birthed out of that empirical data. I took that empirical data to UCLA and said, hey, I need to solve for X. And X is the strong Black woman. And X is understanding the psychology behind how and why and what was driving the decision making for women like Mama Davis, like Tammie Denyse, who live, who work a full-time job, have a side job, and and then come home and have a family. And God forbid, if I wanted to have a life, outside of all of that, where is there time and space for healing for me? For other women that look like or resonate with me and my story. And so Project SOAR was birthed out of all of that, to understand that. And I wanted to take the FUBU model, for us, by us. I wanted to hear the women's voices themselves. I wanted to have the research led by a Black woman. And so my co-PI, Dr. Annette Stanton at UCLA Department of Psychology, she understood it. She understood what I was saying when I said, I understand that you are a white woman, but you can't come in the room because you change the dynamics just by your presence, and even if you still said, well, you can ask the questions and I'll just be there. Just by you being in the room, it changes the dynamics of trust in the room. I needed it to be an all Black, all woman space. And I, as the community leader, as the trusted voice in the community, needed to lead the research. And so Project SOAR is doing some phenomenal things. We are in our next phase of it. The project started here in California, and then we received some funding to be able to create a nationwide survey. So Project SOAR is nationwide, and we are applying for our next phase of funding. I can't say a lot about what those details are, but we want to still look at the everyday woman. I participated in research that's a long game. Had I died prior to that 5 years, I wouldn't have seen the benefits of the research. Carrie's Touch is regularly focused on direct services and support for women, because what we understand is at the rate with which we die, many of the women will not see the benefits of any type of support that's out there for them. So we are always centering our work on the women, in the women, and around direct services. But we also know that research is a long game. We also know that policy is a long game. We also know that DC, yeah, you drug me to DC, and I'm always fighting to say this country exists beyond the East Coast. That if we want to say we have national partnerships and we are doing national work, we have got to include folks on the other side of the country. I know that there are people there are companies here based in California who give most of their funding to organizations on the East Coast. Where is there equity in the funding for the people, even in your own backyard?
You speak a mouthful, Reverend Tammie, and I have to say, you know darn well that of all the things, being a good partner is hearing the good and the bad, and I feel like hearing the good and the bad and being able to hear it openly, which I feel like you have shared with us some of the hard truths that me and my colleagues have taken back and tried to implement change, true, meaningful, long-term change. And I feel like that is your very important role. I feel like you have helped us be a better organization, a better partner. And none of that is easy. And I feel like, my mom used to say it to me all the time, the best things in life are not easy. Like there is no free lunch. There is no, it's like you have to be the trailblazer sometimes and do the hard work. And I have to say, it is honestly not just like kind of the East Coast, West Coast, right? I'm from Colorado, so I think of myself a little bit in the middle, but it's more than that, even within a state, right? Yeah. You are in Sacramento, so you are, Northern California, and Amgen sits in Southern California. And it's telling people to think bigger, to think more differently, and to also not think you can go a top-down approach. It has to be some top-down, some from the side, some from the bottom up, whatever it's going to take to disrupt, whatever it's going to take to put resources where they are. I know I could talk to you forever. I feel like once we get going, we just get going. I will commit this to you. We can have a conversation anytime. We can have a conversation too. You are a key and valued partner for us and will continue to be. I commit to you to always taking your calls, hearing your thoughts. You have been very generous in doing the same for me when we have thoughts about, hey, could we do this? Hey, what's the next thing? How can we continue to be in this space, together? And when you walk separately, I will always stand and be the voice, appropriately to sing your praises on the outside, but where it's appropriate, I will be right there alongside of you. This has been the most fun conversation, as it always is. Mostly I just love the takeover and snatching the mic from you, because you legit thought you were going to be the one who was going to be asking the questions. But
I did think that that's the way this was going to go down, but it was exciting to have this conversation. And if I have any final thoughts, just to kind of summarize what we've talked about. I think for me, the work that I do is definitely always driven by the women. And a few years ago, I started thinking about, the numbers, ending the 41%. And I'm glad to see that people are starting to say that now. Other than just saying, Black women die at approximately 41% higher rates than white women, which people just spout out as if we're ordering your favorite beverage from Starbucks. And I think we have to say that that Black women are still more than 20 years later dying from breast cancer at 41% higher rates than white women. Because I think the awareness and the onus is on those of us who are in the work and in the space to acknowledge the magnitude of that statistic, because it's not just a number. I don't know that there's any other statistic in cancer of any genre of cancer that has stood and held firm for more than 20 years without any movement or progress toward eliminating that number, that statistic. So I want to be mindful to not leave this conversation without making that point. And I said a few minutes ago that if we are going to solve for X, and X is the strong Black woman, if we say that if we make breast cancer better for Black women, by default, we will make breast cancer better for all women. Because if Black women are being impacted the most, and we start to look at how to make the breast cancer experience better for Black women, then everybody wins. And I say that in full acknowledgement of the fact that they don't want Black women to survive. When we look at the value that Black women bring to society, what we know is that the powers that be do not want to give credit to Black women in that regard. And so if breast cancer is taking Black women out at these disproportionately higher rates that have been in place, then we need to start looking at not just the 41%, but who's keeping the 41% there. And I want to change the narrative and not talk so much about the 41% of women that succumb to this disease. But I want to start celebrating and featuring and highlighting the 59% of us that are beating the odds, and looking at what are we doing to beat the odds, and start spreading that message so that more Black women can survive this daggone disease. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Anytime. It's been a pleasure.
My precious Linda Murakami, that was fun. Thank you for coming and taking over the No Longer Silent Patient Access campaign and interviewing me. And thank you again, my friend, for Amgen and Amgen's continued support of our work. Thank you to renowned virtual photographer John Keatley and his incredible team. A special thanks to Photos by A-Love LLC, April Jones, Retouch Artist, and to the dedicated Carrie's Touch tribe for your unwavering support in helping us create stories that heal. And another big thank you to our platinum sponsor, Amgen. For more information about these stories and other survivor support and advocacy information, visit us at our website at www.carriestouch.org.